Hi everyone! So I have been talking about it for the last couple of videos and I am finally showing and talking about my Frankenshadows with my Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance palette. I'm very excited because I think these shadows turned out very well and I'm very excited to play with them. I've been holding off playing with them too much because I wanted to show my palette first. The sparkly orange on my lid is a creation from this, so let's just show the palette. So I will show you what it looks like, and you can see the 4 shadows on this side that I did change, and I will explain my process, how I go about creating a Frankenshadow. I did try my best to show the general process for one of the shadows, for Cyprus Umber, and then I just did the rest off camera. I actually had to wait because normally I would do everything all at one time, but just to show, I only did one. But I'll explain my whole process, what I do, and maybe give a little bit of helpful hints, tips, tricks, hopefully along the way. It's not something that I think will work for everybody. It's something that I started doing a couple of years ago when I was panning palettes and I had shadows I hated and I was trying to find other ways to use them, and I started creating Frankenshadows. I call it Frankenshadows because other people were calling it Frankenshadows, basically, because you get to play Dr. Frankenstein basically, and you are creating something out of a bunch of different parts. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I will definitely say that. Sometimes you get some real winners and sometimes some real losers. I have used Anastasia shadows for pan that palette before, or for Frankenshadows before, when I was panning the Mario palette, and I created some beautiful things that I loved using and I actually found myself missing. I will say that that's kind of the danger of this as well, is you might fall in love with something you create and then be unable to recreate that again. So just keep that in mind. So the things that you need for creating a Frankenshadow are actually very simple. If you've ever repressed a shadow before or any sort of powder product, that's what you need, plus whatever you want to combine it with. So the most difficult thing right now might be the alcohol you need to repress something, or in this case, repress and recreate or create something new. So the alcohol might be the hardest thing to come across if you don't already have some. I know around me all of the stores are currently sold out. So that might be the most difficult thing. There's a lot of articles and videos online about strictly repressing things, and if you want a little bit more step-by-step, something a little bit more technical for that process, I would definitely recommend doing a Google search for like how to repress makeup step-by-step. There's a lot of really informative articles and that's where I learned a lot from. But essentially you have your shadow that you want to create something new from. So in my case, it was this particular palette. You need shadows to mix. I'll get into that a little bit more, but you need to have something to mix it with. It's good to have a small container. I don't find that you need a very large container. Also, don't use anything very expensive. In some cases, especially if it's plastic, which is what I tend to use, it will stain. That's been my experience with it. It doesn't mean it's not still usable, it just means it might be stained, whatever sort of color you use. That's just been my experience with it. Then you need something like toothpicks and makeup brushes. You could use either. I find a combination works the best for me. I will use toothpicks generally for like picking shadow out, but I like brushes because I will use the opposite end of a brush. So I don't have the particular ones I used in front of me, but I'll just use this as an example. Like I'll use the bottom part of the brush, and then I will actually sometimes use the actual brush itself to help clear out the shadow into my little container. And then some paper towel and stuff to clean up is always a good idea. But those are the general things that you need. So I'm going to show you what I did to Cyprus Umber first. So I decided Cyprus Umber was a shadow I wanted to change because I really disliked the formula. It's a matte, sort of warm brown shadow. I don't mind the color. So one of the first things I recommend doing when you decide that you want to try Frankenshadowing something, take something you don't like and identify the reasons why you don't like it. So in my case, I looked at Cyprus Umber and I was like, I like the color. I don't like the formula. I find it was a little too patchy, and I didn't want a matte shadow. I wanted something a little bit more metallic, or a lot metallic, something that I could use kind of on its own, something that would be very shimmery. I would be okay with something the exact color of Cyprus Umber, but ideally probably something a little bit brighter, maybe something more bronzy, a little bit bronzer. So the first thing that I do in that case is, well, I am generally pretty good at identifying and thinking automatically what kind of thing I want to match with it. Like in my head, I was already thinking, okay, I've got this particular MAC shadow, I've got that MAC shadow, I've got this, I've got this. So if you are not that familiar with the things you already have, now is the time to swatch things. What you really want to do is play. Don't just start mixing things together. Swatch stuff on the back of your hand, on your arm, whatever, first. That playtime is really going to inform you going forward for making your Frankenshadow, because when you are layering things on top of each other, it's going to give you a rough idea of what it will actually look like when you completely create it. It will be a rough idea. It won't turn out exactly the way that you are thinking it's going to. It might be a little bit darker, it might be a little bit lighter, but in general, it gives you a good indication. So, you know, you can start swatching the shade that you want to change, then swatch another shadow on top of it. See if you like it. You might have to go back and forth a little bit with like a light swatch of the thing that you want to change, or like your base sort of shadow, and then the altering shadow, and then a little bit of that base shadow, and back and forth. You might need to kind of build it up and get an idea of whether or not it's something that would work for you. In my case, I chose a Pixi shadow. I chose this particular palette because Pixi actually had sent me another one of this palette, so I was a little bit more willing to sort of tear it up, but that hasn't stopped me from using other things before as well, and things that I only have one of. I will say approach with caution. You can do some serious damage to your shadows because you are sort of scraping off a few layers to put into the powder concoction. So don't use your absolute favorite things that you love using all on its own if you really love using it that way. You know, you don't want to necessarily waste the things you have. I also strongly recommend pairing something you don't like with something you do like. So that could just mean formula-wise. I have used this Pixi palette before, so I knew that the formula was fairly strong. It's somewhat comparable to MAC, which was what the other thing I was thinking about mixing with. So I said, you know what, I'll go with this first and match it, because the first thing I thought of was, see, this shadow is like, these are a little torn up now, but I thought of a shadow called a Bronze Gleam, because I figured it was fairly close to Cyprus Umber, and I was really right. When I swatched them over each other, it's basically the same color, just the Bronze Gleam has a pretty strong shimmer to it. But I wanted something a little bit warmer than that. I wanted something a little bit bronzier, so that's when I also took a light swatch of the foiled bronze shade on top of that, and that's really what guided me and made me figure out, okay, this is the general combination of things that I want. So once I scraped all of Cyprus Umber out of the pan, and it was a process, but you just have to go back and forth and figure out what sort of tools work for you, whether it is something like a toothpick or the back of the brush or the actual brush itself, and just be gentle and put everything into that container you were using for mixing. And then the fun part is mixing the shadows together. I wanted to take a generous amount of the Bronze Gleam shade from Pixi, and I contemplated leaving it at that at first, but then I decided to mix in the foiled bronze shade as I had intended, and I'm glad I did, even though the result ended up being lighter than I thought it was going to be, but it's still a very workable shade for me, and I've only swatched it and used it from the liquid version. So that's how I kind of initially swatch things. So before it's set, I will swatch the liquid from the mixture with the alcohol in the back of my hand, just to kind of see like, okay, is this right? Do I want to add a little bit more before I let it sort of set? So once you have the right amount of powder in here and gauging how much you need, it's really, for me, eyeballing it, because you're not mixing it within the pan. You're mixing it into a separate container, and then kind of scraping and pouring that container into your little pan. So I tend to put a little bit more than I think is going to be needed, just so that I have enough and I don't run out. Because if you don't have enough at the end, once you've put enough in your little pan, you can't really mix more in. It's not really going to work that way. So I'd rather waste a tiny bit of shadow than not have enough. So I definitely put a little bit too much alcohol in it when I was sort of demonstrating what I did. This is mostly just for ease of the video. I don't recommend putting too much alcohol in your mixture. You don't need a liquid. You want something more like a paste, but if you have a paste, you want a very small container because it's very difficult to kind of scrape that out of the container and into your pan. If you do use more alcohol, it will be more liquidy. You just have to be more careful with where you store it, but it will dry. So my Cyprus Umber shade was very liquidy, but it did dry. Now I don't press my shadows. Some people do with repressing, so when they fill their pan and then you can press it down. I don't tend to do that, so my shadows end up being very loose. And I know this, so I always use my metallic shadows wet foiled with Fix Plus, and that's my preference and it's what works for me. So just also keep that in mind. You may want to consult some of those other instructions for repressing, for the steps they take for actually repressing, because I never actually do the repressing motion with mine. That's just the basic steps that I go through for creating my shadow and what I did for Cyprus Umber. Cyprus Umber was really easy for me because I knew kind of exactly what I wanted that shade to be. But I decided to be ambitious and also switch around a few of the other shades as well, because I thought, why not? And I just wanted to have a little bit of fun with it. So I created one fairly unique, unusual shade with the former Love Letter. Yes, Love Letter is no more, and it is now this sort of bluish purple shade. I tore apart some Natasha Denona eyeshadows before anybody comes for me. I knew what I was doing. I love these shadows, and yes, they look a fright right now because I haven't used them since. But this is not even the original palette, by the way. This isn't the Tropic palette. This is, I've sort of revamped all of my Natasha Denona eyeshadow palettes and remixed them basically. But I have a blue shade that was in a little mini palette, the Aries palette from a couple years ago. And then I do have Mint Frost and Laguna from the Tropic palette, and I took just a tiny little bit of each and then mixed that with Love Letter to create that beautiful blue purple shade. I wanted something a little bit more pastel, and I almost thought about just like adding white to it. And I thought about being a little bit more, but then when I started mixing it, I liked the shade and I liked all the sparkles in there, because that's the thing with the Natasha shadows, there's so many sparkles. I chose the Natasha Denona ones to Franken because they are some of my absolute favorites, and the Anastasia is one of my absolute least liked. So I thought that I would try mixing them together and see how well they play together. So I've only swatched the Love Letter shade with the new Love Letter shade with the liquid that was left when I did my Frankenshadow. So I haven't played around with this too much, and I'm really excited to play around with this more. The Warm Taupe shade was a spur of the moment decision. I don't hate Warm Taupe, but I don't love it, so I decided to take my Too Faced Chocolate Bar palette, and this is one I've used for Frankenshadows in the past that has served me incredibly well, so I thought that I would take a chance again, and I took a little bit of the shade Rich Girl and a little bit of the shade Drippin' Diamonds. So Drippin' Diamonds is a silver, and Rich Girl is sort of a like white gold color right here. This is, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted with this. I thought maybe I'd try and make Warm Taupe a little bit cooler. I think I achieved that. It is kind of a dull shade though, I will say. But I haven't swatched this one either, just with the liquid version, and it was kind of dull, but I think it's pretty. It's just something, I feel like I'm gonna end up really liking this, and then it's going to be a very simple shadow to use. And I didn't have a lot of Warm Taupe left. One thing you realize if you are scraping out shadows you've already hit pan on and you have your little sort of container of powder, you realize how little you actually have in there, and that was the case with Warm Taupe. I don't really recommend doing it with a brand new shadow to just put it back in the same pan, because you are definitely going to have a lot more shadow than you know what to do with, which was my case with Realgar. So this was a pretty full pan of an orange eyeshadow, and I really wanted to turn it into something else, and it just hit me that I wanted it to be this orange with gold, which is why, again, the chocolate bar palette and the chocolate gold shade, which I'd used this exact shadow for Frankenshadow before, so I knew it worked really well, and so I took a little bit more of that. It's not a shadow I like wearing on its own, because as much as I love gold, it's a very yellow gold, and I'm not a fan of the very yellow gold. It's not the kind of gold that draws me in, but mixed with the orange, it is one of my absolute favorite things, and it turned out pretty much exactly the way that I wanted it to, except that it's a little chunky, and it's chunky because the pan was so full of powder shadow. I hadn't hit pan on Realgar, so taking that shadow apart and dismantling it, I didn't do the greatest job, and mixing it together, it didn't turn out that great, and it's probably a shadow that would have benefited from being actually pressed, but I opted not to do that, and it's still going to be workable. I still can use it just fine, and I did use it today for my eye look, and I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I'm really happy with how it looks. I did use it foiled with Fix Plus, and I just had a really great time using the shadow, and this is one that I think I'll just blow through now because it's a metallic orange, and I'm gonna wear this a lot. This is the kind of shadow that I love. So those are the 4 shadows I decided to do something to. I'm kind of tempted to pan this palette, to be honest. Don't tell anyone. I honestly never thought that I would feel that way about a palette again. Maybe it's being in self-isolation for so long that it just makes me long for those days. No, definitely not. But maybe it makes me just want to see what I can do, or at least try and find some motivation to use things, because when I wasn't motivated to use shadows before and I was panning things, it really kept me going in that way. So maybe I will pan it. I'm making no definite promises right now, but I'm definitely inspired by it because I've been using the shadows in different ways. I actually used raw sienna today as my blush. I've been playing around with the shadows as blushes as well. I don't know, maybe if I make more progress, maybe I'll want to keep using it. Maybe I will turn some of these other shadows into Frankenshadows. I'm not really inspired to turn any of these other things into Frankenshadows at this moment, but maybe once I finish a couple things, if I finish a couple things, maybe that'll change. But anyway, that is my Frankenshadow adventure. This is my, Edge of Extinction palette with the Modern Renaissance. I'm really glad I brought this back. I feel like I've brought it back to life a little bit because I really, I wasn't using it. It was really sitting out on the side, and I really feel like this project has helped inspire me a lot with just this palette and just with some of the things I used to do and some of the things I miss doing from some of the various painting projects and that kind of stuff. So anyway, I hope this was at least a little bit interesting. General advice if you want to do Frankenshadows is just follow your heart, but don't be afraid to look things up. If you want to create a specific shade and you're not quite sure how to get there, don't be afraid to look it up. Don't be afraid if you're like, I really want a pink shadow and I'm not quite sure how to get there. Look up color combinations that equal pink. Look up what sort of ratios you would need in order to make the pink happen. It doesn't have to just be random. It doesn't have to be something that you guess at. You can actually look up that stuff if you know what your end result is. And if you don't know what your end result is, play around. Look at the stuff you already have and the stuff that you like or the stuff that you want. Look at things that are new, things that you are longing for, that are new products, and how can you create that with what you already have. If it's something that's not really inspiring you anymore, how can you turn it into something that does? So don't be afraid to look stuff up. Don't be afraid to swatch things. Go through your collection, look at the things you have, think about what you like and some of your favorite formulas, and if you happen to have duplicates of it or you have a lot of the shadow, like it's a very big pan, or you don't mind sacrificing a few little scrapings for your concoction, just really think about it that way. Don't make any rash decisions. I really recommend swatching that kind of stuff first before you start digging into pans. Don't do a lot at one time as well. If you're first starting out trying this, try one first. Honestly, just try one. Do it before you go to bed, let it sit overnight, and then look at it again in the morning and see what it has turned into, if it works well for you, if it's something that you've enjoyed doing, and if the end result was worth it before you just like dismantle everything. I'm sorry, everything's shifting and falling apart here, but anyway, let me know if you have any other questions, comments, or concerns. If you are interested in doing the whole Frankenshadow thing and maybe you want a little bit more guidance, feel free to reach out to me, leave me a comment, send me an email. I will admit I haven't been checking my email too frequently, so the best place is probably here, or like via Instagram, like leave a comment on one of my posts or send me a DM or something like that so that I know what to look for. Just, I'm willing to help anybody who might need a little help, or if you're looking for guidance on how to create something from what you already have, like I'd definitely be willing to help you out in any way I possibly can. So say you were looking for what to do with like raw sienna or something, just hit me up, let me know if I can be of any guidance and help in that way. I'm more than happy to do so. And just more than anything, just have fun. That's the best part about this, is it's fun, and it really has helped me over the years with my various panning things, is that it made it more exciting for me, especially at that time when I really wasn't excited for it anymore. I remember it with the Burgundy x9 and the Mario palette in particular, where I just was like really done with it and wanted it to be over. But then I got really excited again by creating new shadows. So especially if you are panning something, or you just have a bunch of things that you're bored with, this might be something to be fun with. But again, approach with caution at first, and don't take on too much at first. Just think about it first, because you really can't go back once the decision has been made to start ripping into those shadows. So just keep that in mind. Anyway, thank you so much for watching and for hanging out with me today. I really, really appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I hope we get a chance to chat soon. Bye for now.